Hey, welcome back to US History Lecture Videos. I'm Mrs. Richardson. Today we're going to be covering urbanization and its challenges. So the goals of today's lesson: explain the growth of American cities in the late 19th century and identify the key challenges that Americans face due to urbanization, as well as some possible solutions. So continuing to talk about the second half of the 19th century, and today focusing on urbanization, or the major growth of cities. So rapid urban growth occurred in late 19th century America. This was partially due to new technologies and industrialization, which led to massive changes, like more and more people moving to the city for factory jobs, and then those people needed housing, entertainment, um, and access to goods, food and clothes and all of the things. And so this urbanization happened really quickly on the grand scale of things, and the cities were struggling to catch up. So rough timeline, a couple of things that kind of happened. We have professional baseball starting in 1876. In 1885, Chicago builds its first 10-story skyscraper. In 1887, the electric trolley is invented. 1888, Jane Addams opens Hull House in Chicago. It's a settlement home. We'll talk about that in a little bit. 1890, Jacob Riis publishes How the Other Half Lives, and Carnegie Hall opens in New York. And then in 1895, Coney Island opens. So we see the growth of cities, we see the growth of things to help with the growth of cities, and also entertainment in the cities. We're going to briefly cover all of those things today. So new industrial technologies created many factory jobs. 24/7 factory operations and long hours required workers to live nearby. So declining rural prospects pushed people to seek urban work, and then they needed to live in the urban area in order to complete their urban work. Immigration also brought millions of new residents to cities. So we see some key cities really grow up around industry. So for example, each city kind of developed around core industries, like the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania developed around the steel industry, just for an example. So there were four major innovations that shaped urbanization: electric lighting, communication improvements, intracity transportation, so transportation within the city, and skyscrapers, right? Cities only had so much space. How were they going to fit all these people? They needed to go up. So first, electric lighting. Electric power plants opened in 1882, and this began to allow factories to operate 24/7. Cities also began lighting their streets at night, which changed the pace of urban life, right? Now you're not following the sun for your sleep schedule, right? You're following a clock. And this is where we see a big shift in America to working on the clock, sleeping on the clock, and not necessarily being ruled by the natural rhythms of night and day like a farmer would be. We also see communication improvements like the telephone, which quickly replaced the telegraph. And this allowed for long distance instant communication, which connected businesses all across the country. All right, horse-drawn omnibuses and horse cars became inadequate as electric trolleys were invented in 1887 to much more effectively and quickly transport larger numbers of people. We also see as early as 1868 elevated trains developing, which is kind of insane. If you've ever been to the city of Chicago, right, some of their trains run up above the street to make effective use of the space. Subways began operating in 1897, trains that run underneath the city to make effective use of the space. And then we also see the rise of skyscrapers. Geographic limitations created the need for vertical growth. You can't go out anymore, you have to go up. Steel construction allowed for taller buildings. The first skyscraper was a 10-story home insurance building in 1885, which was made more practical by the electric elevator. Remember, if you have a 10-story building without an electric elevator, you are walking up 10 flights of stairs, and many people did not want to do that. And so with the invention of the electric elevator, it became much more practical to have a skyscraper and be able to get up and down. And so then we see the rise of skyscrapers really starting to take over. This is that 10-story home insurance building in Chicago, which was considered the first modern skyscraper. Obviously, you can see at the time that this image, there were other skyscrapers, but when it was first built, it was pretty renowned. So all of its growth brought some challenges. There's overcrowding in tenement houses and slums, poor sanitation, public health issues, class inequalities, ethnic tensions, corrupt local politics. The city was struggling to physically fit all of these people. And many of the working class could afford very little in the way of housing, and so they were often in overcrowded, poorly maintained homes owned by a landlord who was not very motivated to maintain the building because there were no laws forcing them to maintain the building. And so we see people living in dirty conditions, moldy buildings, rundown buildings, sharing an outhouse with 6 different families that, can't keep up, like just really unsanitary. And so it was hard to keep things clean, which led to public health issues, right? If you got people, dumping slop buckets, out the window onto the street, there's no, cleanup. That just leads to disease. So lots of bad situations like that going on here. And this is just kind of another image. This is a famous image from Jacob Riis, who did a photo documentary book basically to show what conditions were really like in tenement houses. And this helped spur reforms in tenement laws. Like a lot of people who weren't living in these parts of the cities just didn't believe that it was actually happening like that. But then you get this photographic evidence being spread among the influential and wealthier people, who are being encouraged morally to do something about this. So you can see how many people lived in the small space, right? How overcrowded it was, how not clean, right? Things like that. Last thing I want to talk about today is the settlement house movement. This was also created to provide additional relief to those who were suffering in the lower class. The settlement house movement was ultimately pioneered by women like James Adams in Chicago and Lillian Wald in New York. This was considered an early progressive reform movement. It was built upon ideas originally thought of or put out there by social reformers in England. With no particular religious bent, right? So this was a non-religious movement. They worked to create settlement houses in urban centers where they could help the working class, and in particular, working class women find aid. So their help included things like child daycare, evening classes, libraries, gym facilities, and free healthcare. Jane Addams opened her now famous Hull House in Chicago in 1889. And Lillian Wald's street settlement opened, Henry Street settlement opened in New York 6 years later. So this movement continued to spread to other cities where they provided relief to working class women and also offered employment opportunities for women who were graduating college in the growing field of social work, helping people, for lack of a better term. Social work has changed a lot since then, but this was the beginning of it. So overall, 19th century urbanization led to rapid growth. With rapid growth came pros and cons, right? Came large problems, the problems of rapid growth when the cities are not physically able to handle that yet. And then as a result of the conditions that people were living in the cities, there was a wave of movements and reforms to try and make that better for people. So we're going to talk more about those reforms as we move forward in time as well.